All right, we have returned from our lunch break. I have an announcement. Supervisor Garamendi will be coming a little bit late. He had an emergency phone call. He had to go pick his son up at school. He broke his nose. Oh, no. So playing water polo, I guess, I don't know. But he said he will be here. What time that is, I don't know. So, moving on to item number 27. Madam Clerk.
Item 27 is from the Human Resources Department to adopt a resolution approving recommended equity increases for unrepresented employees and authorizing changes to the position control list for fiscal year 2018-19 probation department budget effective September 1st, 2018.
Good afternoon, Chair, members of the board. Judy Hawkins, Human Resources and Risk Director. I am bringing before you the equity increases for the fiscal year 18-19 for the classification of assistant probation officer. Assistant chief probation officer and our supervising deputy probation officer. These equity positions we did discuss during our recommended budget hearings, but one of the things that the reason that I am bringing it back is because these were approved during the probation's discussions of their budget, and these are not hitting the general fund. These are funded outside of the general fund. And so I don't think that was made clear during the recommended budgets, and that's why it is bringing forward separate.
Any board questions? Any members of the public have questions on this item? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the board. I'm looking for a motion.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I so move.
I have a motion by Supervisor Oliveira.
Second.
Second by Supervisor Mills. Call for a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Passes 4-0 with one absent.
Thank you.
Yes.
Madam Clerk, item number 28.
Item 28 is from the Board of Supervisors, the appointment of applicants to serve on various committees, commissions, advisory boards, and county service areas. Included in your packet today are 2 appointments. The first is for 1 vacancy on the Library Commission for a term expiring 12/31/2018. We have an application from Celeste Bordner. The second is from the Resource Conservation District to fill a vacancy for a term expiring 11/30/2018. This was a midterm vacancy from an appointment that was made by the Board of Supervisors when the RCD was established. We have 3 applications: Charles Sid Beckman, Tim Johnson, and Tyler Waterman.
Okay, we'll have to tackle these separately because of the 3 candidates for the 1 Resource Conservation District. So if we want to tackle the Library Commission first, I have no opposition to Celeste. I know her. She's part of the Friends of the Library. So.
You looking for a motion, Chair? Looking for a motion?
I'm comments on how you feel. Okay. I think we have to open up for public comment on it. So,
I have no objection.
any public comments on the Library Commission appointment? Seeing none, now I'm open for a motion.
So move, Mr. Chair.
A motion by Supervisor Oliveira.
Second.
Second by Supervisor Mills. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes 4-0-1. Now, Resource Conservation District. We have 3 candidates with 1 vacancy.
Mr. Chair, are any of the candidates present?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Do I hear anybody?
Well, Chair, I think we'd be looking for someone who has some good understanding of what the Resource Conservation District's functions are, as well as someone who can understand project roles and responsibilities. Mr. Beckman has those qualifications with his years of service with the U.S. Forest Service and also with the National Park System. which would be an integral part of one of those pieces that we're currently missing in the RCD, is someone who has that connection to the federal side. If we're going to develop a master stewardship agreement in our county, having that background would be an invaluable asset. So I'm recommending Mr. Beckman be the choice.
If I could just add, I'm sorry I did not mention earlier, all three applicants had originally applied and were considered when the RCD was formed.
That's correct.
Any other comments? Seeing none, we'll open it to the public. Any public comments on this item? Seeing none, we'll bring it back to the board. I have a recommendation of Sid Beckman. Do I have a motion on that?
I'll make that motion, Chair.
I have a motion by Supervisor Mills. Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Second by Supervisor Clapp. Call for a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Passes 4-0 with one absent. So, moving on to item number 29. This is building. Madam Clerk.
We need to take a quick break.
We need to take a quick break? Okay, we need a quick break according to the clerk. We will take one. All right, we're back in session. Madam Clerk, item number 29.
Item 29 is from the Building Department to receive an informational presentation relative to code regulations for the use of cargo containers.
Mr. Short, this is your show.
Nothing.
You're good. Oh, it was on.
Oh, sorry. Sorry. Technically challenged here. Good afternoon, Chair and Board. We're going to be presenting for informational purposes is the container regulations out there and also some dialogue on whatever the board wants to direct on Peter on planning when it comes about zoning code regulations. So we set up a little brief presentation so you can ask questions during it, whatever you want to collaborate on it. It's an open type of dialogue.
All right.
So with that said, we're going to move on. To try to get educational component to this, to the public and to the board, there's been a lot of perception that there is no code provisions for it. But how the building code and building standards, if you know how they're adopted, they're created by a body called ICC, International Code Council, and then they're adopted by the Building Standards Commission, and then the state by mandates to every jurisdiction have to do these. So these are state laws that every jurisdiction is mandated to do. These code sections have been around for many, many years. The one that gives legal authorization for a container to be considered a structure, or at least it needs to be permitted, and has, which I found out recently here, that it has been permitted here in the county since we have records going back to 1977 for commercial projects. We can easily say that it's been being permitted since back 1977 for commercial, and more inconsistent on residential. But with that said, the history is that this code provision of anything, code section 105.2 has been around for many years. 120 square foot structure, anything greater than that would require a building permit. Anything within it, like electrical, mechanical, or anything like that, also would need separate discipline type structures. Also, the code stipulates that there is a code provision that allows temporary structures, so the building official can say up to 180 days, but it still needs to comply with any mandatory or health and safety issues, but it can be done temporary. The past permits that I've noticed here on commercial have been done for temporary and also permanent, but there's very few of them that probably we've seen been permitted, but we're working on a case that has been permitted. The definition of structure is another one out there that in the definitions of code, the 2016 California Building Codes defines, and it's taken straight out of the health and safety code. I'll talk about that a little bit. But by definition, it's just a built structure, includes prefabricated structures. It's any fabricated, any material, building element, or anything made by humans is considered a building element, a material, or a building structure. So the definition is any structure used for intended for supporting or sheltering any use or occupancy. So they have any use and occupancy. So what necessitates, what right now the discussion is zoning and building code regulations building code regulations are very prescriptive. They're state laws. We have to enforce them as their health and safety concerns come around. But the zoning one is where the board can, Peter will be talking about that a little later, about that's a land use issue, how to locate it, where to put it. Do you want it in residential? Do you want it in commercial? Those are the kind of discussions the board has then with land use. So these containers are usually placed in areas near property lines and stuff like that where that would be dictated in the zoning code. Building codes, you can pretty much put them up to the property line. You can do anything as long as it meets the fire life safety requirements. So those are more of a, the zoning code is really what controls the location. This also necessitates more, in the next questions is why do we have permitting? Well, one is the life and health and safety codes are really predominantly part of it. I do want to mention that the health and safety code even defines structure here. It is section code 8908, and it reads a little bit differently, but it reads as follows: structures as follows. Structures means of which is built or constructed, an edifice or building of any kind, or any piece of artificially built or composed of parts joined together in some definite manner. So that's kind of where the basis of a structure and the code enabling is where a permit is required. There are other questions here that we're going to talk about. Why do containers less than 10 feet from each other, and why no electrical mechanical plan require a foundation? Well, the policy that we kind of came out right now is kind of an interim policy because there was a lot of inconsistency since the 70s of what, it was an unwritten policy, I guess, of what was required. But the code does require, if you have electrical, mechanical, you have to get a permit. If it's 10 feet, the spacing 10 feet is based on fire codes. It was really just to prevent separate buildings between each other for you don't get accumulation of hazardous materials in there. It creates a congregated problem. It doesn't mean you can't put them 10 feet together, but you have to look at the accumulation of square footage and what is in its contents. So that was the reason why there's the standard 10 foot in there. Kind of explains that, but it doesn't mean you can't put them together if you look at it from the fire regulations and have a more detailed analysis. Why does it matter it's stored in shipping containers? As we mentioned before, what the contents is what dictates in the code, the building codes and the fire codes, is occupancy and use. If they have hazardous materials in there, say large flammable liquids, it will create an H occupancy, which can be explosive. If you have large volumes of batteries in there, it can be an explosive character to it, and it needs to be mitigated for fire safety, for explosion or fire to structures and humans nearby. So there is a reason that from a building code analysis, we need to know the occupancy of every structure, every building that comes across that table in the counter. That includes buildings, sheds, everything. It's not just containers, it's anything that you have a use for. And building use is different than zoning use, so there's a confusion sometimes. Zoning use is different than building use. The building code has its own uses and occupancies. Can we move a container around in 6 months? No, it's just back to if it's permanently sits there for more than 6 months, it'll be considered permanent according to the code. And that's been kind of an issue for a lot of building officials in the area. I've queried a lot of building officials out California. This is a usual problem across California in rural counties trying to address the same thing. They do have a variety of different ways of handling it. That's why you're going to see, I'm going to be talking about, did I miss a lot of slides on that? We got it all there. Okay. So I just wanted to say there's a lot of variety of different building officials dealing with it in different jurisdictions. I didn't do a survey, but pretty much the draft policy you have out there really just extrapolates from the building codes, and it allows a lot of flexibility for residential accessory use with no foundations. Commercial is a little different because you can get congregate in larger volumes and different occupancies and uses in there. So it's an interim solution to try to create more consistency to what hasn't happened since the 70s from the building prints that I've seen out there so far. Briefly, we'll circle back with, where's my other slide? Okay, that's all there was. Okay, we're going to go on to code on there, and I did want to present. There was a slide in there that showed ICC is in the process of taking public comment on code development. It's a code development committee that is presently putting into the next code cycle which will go through that process to the state via building standards. For the next code cycle, it would probably be most mandated prescriptive code provisions for the so-called cargo containers. So there is I had a link in there. That was the first slide, which, can we go back? How do you go back on that? How do you? Oh. It's not there. It disappeared. No. Well, we'll go on to the code and we'll figure out that slide later. Okay, that's sure you did. Okay, all right. Okay.
So I'll talk briefly about code compliance and our role in this. For us, the shipping containers are going to be a fairly low priority. In fact, if it's just a standard shipping container being used for storage, it's probably going to be one of our lowest priority issues that we come across. That does depend, though, on if they've got anything like electrical systems, plumbing, mechanical, any of that kind of thing is probably going to bump it up a bit. Likewise, if they're being used for living, accommodation, that kind of thing, then that's something that would probably draw more of our attention. It's been a little while since this PowerPoint was put together, but I suspect these numbers are still fairly accurate. We've received we've received 10 complaints so far about shipping containers. We've issued 1 notice of violation, and that was included with a series of other violations. We've issued 3 courtesy letters, just telling people, hey, we're issuing permits for these now, come down and get it sorted out. And then several correction notices were issued for the cannabis cultivation sites while that program was still running. That's slightly different to our usual enforcement process. We've received a lot of feedback about the perception of selective enforcement. We simply don't have the manpower to address every complaint that we receive. So we have to prioritize complaints based upon, generally based upon their impact to health and safety, public health and safety. And then while we were conducting the inspections as part of the urgency ordinance for the cannabis cultivation sites, we spent most of our time doing that, so we came across a lot more shipping containers on those sites, just because of where we were and what we were doing. Here are some examples. Some examples of the things that we've come across in Calaveras. They are being used as parts of buildings, and they're also being modified and put in some rather dangerous situations, as you can see there. And a couple more just with, you can see here on the left, the power panels inside there, they've put doors in there, and some more electrical on the outside. And that's it for us.
Yeah, I'll just take it from here if you would just push the button. So the shipping containers also relates to the zoning code, and we don't have anything in our code right now that specifically addresses shipping containers. Historically, the department has allowed them just as a use by right on larger rural residential and agricultural parcels, as long as they didn't do any modifications to it, like add electrical or plumbing or anything like that. We have required permits for commercial uses, as Mr. Short indicated previously. This has gone on long before I came here. I don't know, how long that's been the practice of the county, but as long as it was just used for storage on a piece of property, that was fine. If they were going to try to add plumbing or electrical, then we treated it like we would any other structure. If an accessory structure was allowed on a parcel, so for example, if it were a residential parcel, you had to have the residence first before you added an accessory structure. We would allow those, and then they'd be subject to a building permit. And again, if it required a permit, if it was not just simply the placement of an unmodified storage unit on a piece of property, then it would have to get a permit, meet all of our development standards. We also indicated that they would need to meet the setback requirements and whatever else we had as far as standards on a parcel. If you hit the next slide. So I reached out to all the other counties. Planning Directors Association has a listserv, and I queried other counties as to what they were doing, and I only, unfortunately, received responses from 3 other counties, but Mono County, Sacramento, and Sonoma provided me what their regulations were. So summarize here that Mono County allows them for temporary purposes for ag or construction uses, that they do allow permanent use in all zones, but they require building permit and standards. They do not allow any kind of water, sewer, electrical connections. In Sacramento County, it varies depending on the zone and the parcel size. It's a minor use permit for residential zones. It is permitted by right on larger parcels, 2 acres and up, but they do require a building permit. And then Sonoma County is fairly simple. They just require a building permit. They treat it as any other structure. At lunchtime, I researched a little further and looked at our neighbors to the north and south. Amador County does permit it in most zones. They allow 1 container on parcels 6 acres or smaller. It needs to meet the setbacks and other development standards, including things like screening and height requirements. They do not require a permit if there's no alteration to the structure or the container itself. In Tuolumne County, they require a building permit. There's different standards depending on the zoning and the parcel size. 1 container for no more than 200 square feet if it's on a residential parcel, 2 containers on commercial or industrial, and then again, development standards would apply, such as setbacks and screening and those kinds of things. So certainly we could modify our zoning code to come up with standards that addresses the unique needs of Calaveras County. Right now, again, our process is to, we've allowed it on rural, residential, and agricultural larger parcels, but if they do any modifications, we require a building permit for that. So, questions of any of us?
Board questions? Supervisor Oliveira, your light.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Mauer, thank you for coming. I understand you did a poll of several counties.
Well, I reached out to every county, and I received a response from 3. And then I did a little further research and looked up Amadors and Tuolumnes, just so we had someone a little closer to us and very in similar circumstances as.
So
as
if I understand correctly, Amador County doesn't require a permit depending on the use? Is that what you said?
They
As long as it's
have
not
to have the
altered.
ordinance here, and it says that building permits shall not be required for the placement of containers unless or until the container is altered or modified in a manner that requires a building permit. Additionally, cargo containers may only be used for human occupancy, subject to a building permit when consistent with all general plan policies and zoning regulations. So they're essentially treating them as structures unless they're just placing the unit on the ground and just simply using it for storage.
I think I have a question for council. In a situation like that where a container is treated as a structure, is a search warrant required to enter that structure? To explore the contents, or would that be subject to a search warrant for criminal offenses? I know it's a tough question for you because you're not a district attorney, no offense.
That is certainly not something that my office has ever looked at or considered under the circumstances as it relates to this presentation. Certainly, if the board would like us to research that a little further, we can, and provide a memo to the board.
Okay, I'd like to see if that falls on that criteria. If my purpose would be, well, if our code compliance people are driving down the road and they see a container, do they have the right to inspect the contents of that container without any probable cause to do so? No leaking fluids, no electrical, no plumbing, visible plumbing, Maybe-
Supervisor Olivera, I would just note that code compliance doesn't just go on to properties, on private property.
Oh, I understand.
Okay.
But how would you inspect the contents of a container?
Do you want to take
I
that, Tom?
can take that one.
Yeah.
I'd like to point out first that this isn't something that we're just going out, driving around the county looking for. If we get a complaint, then we'll investigate it. Otherwise, it really isn't something that we'll be focusing on. As for warrants and that kind of thing, generally our first action is to just speak to the property owner and ask them if we can come and take a look, if we've got any concerns. If they refuse, and we think that there's like maybe a health and safety issue, something like that, then we can request an inspection warrant, which is about as close as we probably get to a search warrant.
Yeah, but you'd
And
have to
that
have
was
some
a-
some
a design.
indication or some probable cause to conduct an inspection, correct?
Correct.
Yeah. And that would be an administrative law, not criminal law, correct?
Yeah, that's right.
Usually it would come from a judge, right? You'll get an
Yeah, we
inspection.
still have to go up to Superior Court and
Yeah.
get the warrant signed by a judge.
It's the same rules apply. Mr. Watts here can't go on someone's property without probable cause and a warrant from a judge, just like in your former line of work, you couldn't just go into somebody's house.
Correct.
Same with a storage container. Anything beyond a fence, you can't go onto someone's property and just start going through their stuff.
That's why I asked the question.
Yeah.
Is this governed by the California Building Code?
Yes, the prescriptive part of that I talked about that defines it as a structure is Health and Safety Code that I mentioned earlier, and it's adopted by the Building Standards Commission and the building codes. As I mentioned before, ICC is working on there's a link that I put in there of a complete 39-page document. I encourage you to read it. It talks about the history. There's 30 million of these in the in the world, and there's probably millions of them out there. It's not just here as a problem, but it really falls under Title 25, which is the Housing Community Department. That really is Title 24. We're kind of stretching Title 20, but pre-manufactured structures fall under Title 25, which I think maybe when the states start hearing it, the state is going to be making a lot of decisions under the HED component. The HED is the Housing Community Development that does mobile homes and everything else. It's going to be treated like the same thing like that. We have to see how the state will come about, but it all derives from the building codes and the building standards for the building permit. We're not talking about land use or anything like that. That's a little different. That's
I understand. Mr. Maurer, you said you polled 58 counties and got 3 responses, correct?
Yes, I sent out a query to all the county planning directors to see if they could provide me with insight of what they were doing, and unfortunately, we responded to me.
Did you get a response back from Ventura County?
I did not.
Okay.
And I could certainly do more research and actually go online, but I was just hoping that I could get a quick response. Here's our code, without me having to pour through their zoning code and try to track down
Understand.
what section of it is. I did that for Amador and Tuolumne, but I did not do that for any other county.
I would suggest you take a look at Ventura County, just for a point of reference. This is informational,
Okay?
but you may want to take a look at their existing standard on that. I had the opportunity to take a look at that, and they do abide by the California Building Code, but their restrictions are far less than what we're talking about here, so that might be one to at least take a look at.
Supervisor, I also queried a lot of the building officials where they're running into is it's a great thing to reuse a product like this because you can reuse it. It's become more trendy to try to build barns out of them, apartment complexes, everything. So they're finding people want to use them for, homeless shelters to housing shortage things. So they got a lot of different other problems with it that it just doesn't meet the code. It just they're using them for everything, which is a good thing. That's why the ICC is coming up with these standards to help address the
And if
need
they're
for-
modifying that in those ways, then I see the need for
Right.
building permits and inspections,
Correct. So they're
depending on
using
use
for
and
the
location
buildings,
and land
basically,
use.
yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Supervisor Mills?
Having fought a fire in Ventura County, the point that I would like to know is, what potential hazards have you folks found out there with the ones that you've looked at that would be a health and safety issue? I'm thinking more along the lines of how first responders, what do they need to be aware of? And is it a point where in some cases we might need to look at placarding like you do with hazmat, where you get over 300 pounds of stored material in a single small location like that? Do we want to be thinking about placarding for the safety of firefighters, especially, and I called it the WUI, the urban interface areas where these are unknowns? And do we just want to be opening the door of an unknown in a critical incident? And what would that represent to them? Because I know they have expressed concerns to me through the local fire districts about the number of them they found and what they have found in them.
That's correct. And you're absolutely right, Supervisor. We have a case now where they have large quantities or potentially large quantities of material in there that might not go through the Coupa program. And the idea of that is it's for first responders to know kind of a general idea of where, how much hazardous material is there when they respond to a fire or anything. They need to know when they address a structure or anything that's on a fire that how much potential fire hazard it is or explosion hazard. So it is a safety concern when it comes to contents related to fire code and Coupa, and any structure that maintains a large volume of hazardous material or explosive material, so flammable material. So that is absolutely correct. That's why we make sure that they stay below those amounts so that it doesn't create those type of issues for first responders to do. So you got to keep them at small amounts and then you're okay. So that's why commercial, I believe, has been required to have a permit here in the past.
So let's take it a step further. Let's say, for instance, you have a flammable issue in a structure. What is one of the first things that we, as fire responders, want to have done to that structure? We turn off the what?
Turn off electrical.
Thank you. But if we don't know that there's electrical there,
You can run into a shock hazard. That's why these metal containers, if they're not done right with a shut off where they can shut it off, because that can be completely electrified. A metal building can be completely electrified with a ground fault in there, and it can electrocute and kill everybody. That's why the electrical on these containers are very dangerous. And as you saw pictures of them using electrical in them, they probably weren't grounded properly. They weren't done right. So that's why we have to make sure we inspect these and have permits so to make them safe for the health and safety concerns for folks out there. Not saying you can't do it, but just make sure it's safe.
so I would ask that we, if nothing more than get input from our local fire districts as to what they consider to be the major issues for them, and how can we help to protect them in those critical incidents involving shipping containers. Now, where it's just bulk storage and, whatever, I don't think anybody really cares ultimately. But
Household goods, who cares?
no, but where we have flammables, where we have lithium batteries, where we have other materials in there, which combined together with other materials can create a very serious problem for us.
Correct.
I think that they should have the right to also have some input in this discussion as to what we want. Now, you're saying that generally, and Peter, am I right, that generally RR1 and smaller is where they get very restrictive? It's the larger than, and the RR2s and better?
So I don't know that we have that many in the smaller residential parcels. Again, there's probably many that have been installed on a piece of property without even coming to the county to ask whether it's permitted. It's just been done. As Thomas pointed out, that it's not a high priority unless we see that there's actually a hazardous material or we've received complaints. But when on rural properties, 5, 10, 20 acres or more, is typically where we see them. And we've allowed them in the past without any kind of zoning clearance, as long as they did not connect it to public water or to electrical or water or sewage disposal.
So this is a combination of a land use issue and a code issue.
Yes.
That in cases of code issues has been in place for a long time.
Right. Yes.
So,
So I think it's just recently, as Ed pointed out, we started seeing storage containers used for all kinds of things, commercial developments, used in lieu of standard construction material. That has created more interest in them. And I think along with the cannabis program, we saw a lot of people using those for that. Because we were required to inspect each of those cannabis sites, we became aware that they were there. We were required to identify, were they in compliance with all other codes and regulations? And if there was a storage container that was on the site, particularly if it was connected to water or power, then they were cited. They didn't have a permit. So yes, it's a combination of zoning and building code, as are many of our rules and regulations, as well as environmental health. If people are living in there, then we need to make sure there's adequate sewage disposal and the water supply meets our standards. So there's a lot of overlapping requirements that we would need to look at to promulgate some appropriate standards for the county.
And the ICC is working on trying to integrate how shipping containers are used in other ways nationally. So this will come from the national level on down, and we'll end up being mandated to do certain things simply as a requirement, whether we like it or not. So it's just a matter of how do we protect the first responders? How do we protect the other citizens that are outside of the boundaries of that property, as well as just health and safety in general? So, okay, I'll leave it at that for now.
Supervisor Garamendi, you have comments?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Ed, did I hear you right? Did you just say that you need to know what's in every building?
That's correct.
Wow. I don't know if
You can't determine occupancy without knowing the use and occupancy of a building. Determine the fire life safety, passive construction, type of construction without that.
I don't doubt that you've got the law and know the rules far better than I do. I'm just a little taken back at the concept that anybody needs to know what's in every building. I don't want you to know what's in my house or my barn, and I don't think anybody else does either. I don't frankly think it's anybody's business. Let me ask you a question, Ed. You and I have been fighting about this for almost a year now, about a different philosophy on this. And one thing I've never figured out is, with the exception of cannabis, which we're dealing with under 8.0, under cannabis regulation, and there's no doubt there's been modifications and those are getting handled. Why is this a priority for our county right now, and why are we spending so much time in this board, in your department, working on this, when there's so many other things that we need to deal with? I was hoping you could help me understand the origin and the why.
Well, like we mentioned earlier, it's not a priority. We're not spending a lot of time on it. We've only had a few complaints and a few things.
We're here.
But we're trying to address the perception of the public, because there's a lot of questions of the public, so we're bringing this as informational to help understand the challenges we have addressing these health and safety issues when we come across them.
The perception from the public stemmed from something. We decided to take this up. We, writ large, county and your department in particular. Why did we decide to pick up this gauntlet now? Since it's been on the books since 1977.
As Peter mentioned before, part of the inspection process, we became more aware of some of the ones you saw in pictures. So those had to be addressed. Those were in the pipeline for the last year and a half or so. So they had to be addressed by those, and that's what brought the awareness about. Otherwise, it probably would be just like other jurisdiction. It's not a priority, and most people are using those because they've been allowed intermittently without permits for years. But since we had those inspections going on, that we saw many of them with very health and safety issues. That's why it's brought forward to, because we had to deal with those.
Well, you just need to know that this is having a chilling effect, and I think it will roll downhill. I have citizens come up to me about the right of entry forms for their property for things like bug kill, and they don't really want the county coming on their property because maybe they've got a shipping container. And maybe it's not a low priority, but nonetheless, people will get worried. I hear people worrying about getting building permits. Maybe they'll just do it without because they're afraid that you guys are going to come through and nitpick everything, since you got to know what's in every building. I think that we have to think about what are the unintended consequences of this entire discussion, and I think it could have a large impact on health and safety. And so, I'm glad that you don't think this is a high priority. But we're going to have a hard row to hoe to convince the public that it's not, and that they're secure, and that you're not driving down the road. I think Ms. Cable said the last time she was in here about this, you can't just turn a blind eye. Well, these things are all over the place. You'd have to be really blind not to see them. And so it leads to perceptions of selective enforcement. It leads to a chilling effect of agencies being able to go on for public health. We talked about that earlier today, for inspections, for trees. I think that this is, maybe a low priority, but it has a really chilling effect, and I'd really like to see us dial this back. I don't really think this is I'm glad to hear it's not a high priority. And I hope that continues. But how we walk this back and start building public trust is going to be a real challenge. I really wish we weren't here.
Any other board comments?
Mr. Chair, I'm going to reserve comments till after I hear public comments.
All right, we'll open it up for public comments.
Hi, everyone. I'm Terry Weatherby. I'm the only structural engineer with an office in 4 counties, and I know all you guys and the self-proclaimed mayor of Moke Hill, the voice of the Calaveras football team. Yeah, okay. So I'm a structural engineer, and I've been engineering these things since 1982 when I graduated from Cal Poly and worked in Fresno. So they've always required engineering. I was kind of shocked that, like Jack, that is suddenly a huge thing, but there were 10 or 12 letters to code compliance in the last 6 months. So when you get a letter to code compliance, that's when it gets generated that the government has to do something. And that's where they usually call me, and I come in and say, well, just do this and this. And it's not that difficult of a thing. I probably engineered 10 or 20 barns in this county using these cargo containers with a roof over them. You can see one out on Pool Station Road if you want to see an example of that. And Russ Thomas built one down in Copropolis, that same design a few years ago. So you see them all over the county. I've done a few more in the last couple of years with the pot stuff. But it's an easy thing to take a cargo container, plop down 4 footings. We use little angle clips, screw anchored to the concrete, and you're done. So it's a super easy thing. The electrical is generally on these things is design build. The building department comes out and looks at it and just makes sure the ground is there, and that, like you're saying, Mr. Mills, that no one's going to electrocute themselves. This is not a huge challenge, other than you saw the pictures from code compliance of what people do. And I guarantee you, if you drive around this county, you could find several hundred more pictures of different kinds of buildings that are far worse than what you saw in those pictures. But anyways, I just wanted to say, if you guys have any questions for me as an engineer in the private sector, I engineer these things all the time, and it's not a big deal. In 2 or 3 years, I can warn you, if you guys read through that deal that's coming from ICC, the requirements are going to be way worse. What they're looking for is they're going to be looking for tags on every one of these things to make sure that it's legal. And then, 2 or 3 years, we're going to have to be fighting, do I engineer every weld on these things to prove it's an existing building? I mean, it's just the nature of the beast. That's what we go through in the state of California. It gets more challenging. That's the word, Jack. More challenging every day. So do you guys have any questions for me as an engineer on these things?
You want to ask questions? Terry's a local engineer. So.
Did I say that enough times?
4 counties.
Is there a shelf life on these containers?
Not
In
that
other
I've-
words, are they good for 20, 40 years?
Yeah, I'm sure there
The
is.
integrity of them? And we don't know what that could be.
Yeah, we don't know.
All right.
The ones that tend to come out that are the super cheap ones are decertified, they say, and the ones that I've checked, I've never seen any. I mean, we have one that I'm familiar with. I won't say where it is. I have one that I'm familiar with, and we've used it for 30 years, and I haven't noticed anything degrading or anything on it.
The one we met with just the other day, been there since '74. You and I had a conversation. So that's.
And I looked at it this morning, and there's nothing on it. It's all
45
fine.
years.
So, and that's 74. Is that 40 years, 45 years?
45 years.
You do have to mention, they do have wood floors in them, that could decay.
Yeah, the wood floors can decay, but I was in a classroom at Moke Hill, and that was a problem. But the last thing I wanted to say is, if you guys ever have a question on these, call me. My office is in Jackson. I live on McCallum Hill. But Ed came up with a handout about 3 months ago that I'm on the industry committee for the county, and we're kind of trying to help Ed to get through some of these challenges. And I'm on the industry committee for the city of Ione also. Amador County doesn't have one. Tuolumne County doesn't have one. And so it's nice to have input from this that Ed started getting. The handout that Ed did was an interpretation of the code based on other counties that had handouts too. And the 5 things that he came up with, I've never seen that in any county, that you could get away with not having a permit and a permanent foundation. And he gave 5 things. If you just do these 5 things, pay $179 and you're done. And anyway, I thought that was super proactive, and you don't see that any other county in the state that I've worked in. I've worked in almost all of them. So, all right, time's up.
Thank you, Jerry. Other public comments?
House of Gallant Taxpayer Association. Is there a problem? We're spending a lot of time on these cargo containers. Has one fallen on somebody, or somebody got hurt with a cargo container? Or, in other words, if there's no problem with them, why all this effort in creating regulations? Also, a point that I was glad to hear the last speaker. One of the things we do need in this county is a private committee to not only look at cargo containers, but look at all our regulations. Go through all of them and make recommendations to either improve or abolish them if they aren't doing what they're supposed to do. By doing that, we'll improve the environment in our county for business. We're actually be reinforcing property rights. We will have a place where people can go and build things, even a golf course, believe it or not. You can do things if you have reasonable regulations, and the only way I can think of getting there is by having committees such as Terry doing with experts to go through these things and to try to make a better tomorrow. Thank you.
Any other public comments?
Hi, my name is Catherine Steyer. I am what I like to consider an average member of your public, all of you. We are the example of the shipping container. We are the 41 years old shipping container, permitted 41 years ago. Electrical was permitted 41 years ago, finalized 41 years ago. We received a courtesy notice regarding our containers. I have to agree with Jack. My biggest fear is the unknown. Is my business going to have to go out of business because I'm trying to comply with a regulation that is, I don't even know what to say. It feels to me that, there have been 2 businesses in town that have received a complaint. No other businesses have received a complaint. And I've got a container that's been there for 41 years. 41 years. It hasn't moved a bit. I want to tell you guys a little bit about shipping containers. A 40-foot shipping container weighs about 8,000 pounds. That's twice as much as your average sedan. The incredible thing is shipping containers are engineered and fabricated, not built, but fabricated, to stack anywhere from 8 to 10 cubes high. Each one can hold a gross weight of 52,000 pounds minimum. When you put the bottom shipping container in the stack, it's holding over 400,000 pounds. This is how they're engineered. They're not engineered to fall apart. They're not engineered like a wood building that's going to fall down in 50 years. These are shipping containers that are engineered to withstand being on a ship, on a railway car, on a truck, moving down the road. They're strong and they're not going anywhere. Somehow our government, and I'm not talking about you guys necessarily, but they have decided that we need protection from everything these days, and in this case, shipping containers. And if we're going to bolt down shipping containers, then we better damn well bolt down every car that gets parked, because they weigh half as much as a shipping container. So like I said before, I want to agree with Jack. My biggest fear is the unknown. I don't know what this is going to cost me. I don't know if I'm going to have my shipping container re-engineered, even though 41 years ago, it went through the permit process. So do I have to do it again? I don't know. Is it engineered? Do I have to put it down? Do I have to bolt it to the ground? Do I have to dig my parking lot up to bolt it to the ground? I've gotten all of these answers in the course of the time that we've been discussing this with the building department. So I'm going to urge you to stop the ordinance now so that we can have a little bit of peace until the ICC decides
Thank you,
to
Kevin.
regulate this. Thank you.
So these changes don't make any sense. If the problem is hazardous conditions, then why is the blanket why has a blanket policy change been made? The pictures in the presentation are health hazards and code violations independent of this reinterpretation of the code. Those pictures aren't the problems that this reinterpretation of the code addresses. The policy change affects every other shipping container sitting on flat ground used for dead storage. This policy change isn't needed to address health and safety hazards such as precariously placed containers. Those are already code violations, and code enforcement has a responsibility to protect the public from these hazards. This policy change isn't intended to address health and safety problems of shipping containers at pot grows that don't exist anymore. This policy change serves one function and one function only, and that is to address the department's desperate need for an alternative revenue stream. According to Ed Short on May 22nd, a permit would cost $200 to $300, and there are many thousands across the county. 200 to 300 times 2,000 equals $400 to $600,000. For the last 40 years, there have been shipping containers at Napa, and nobody cared. Who cares about the shipping containers at Napa? Perhaps a desperate bureaucrat with no connection to our community who would drive local businesses into the ground so he can meet revenue targets for his department and get a pat on the head from a board who have forgotten their oaths. Napa was driven out of business in Valley Springs by an AutoZone and O'Reilly's. Now in San Andreas, they're doing it here with shipping containers. We'd like to know, what don't you like about locally owned and operated businesses, Gary? Dennis, when I heard you say that this is some massive fire hazard, I felt like you want to overregulate. And I don't understand why somebody who identifies as a conservative is so into regulation. But I would like to mention that during the Butte fire, the containers didn't burn. That's the only thing that was left out in D2. Guys, this is about the ban. And it is all about selective enforcement. If only 2 or 3 businesses have gotten these letters, this is not okay. You're going after the little guy. And it is selective enforcement unless you go after everybody. Period. You cannot play favorites here. You're scapegoating growers, you're going after small business people, and it's unacceptable. Thank you.
Yeah, the discussion around shipping containers needs to be taken in the context of the broader conversation about the tone and tenor of the county government as a whole. It's clear by now the majority of people, especially those in rural areas of the county, don't want an overzealous, fee-hungry code enforcement unit infringing on their private property rights and finding them into deeper poverty. Consider listening to us. A couple of weeks ago, I stood here and described cases of people not getting permits for projects they otherwise would have for fear of inviting inspectors onto their properties. Like Supervisor Garamendi mentioned, right now in my neighborhood, people are refusing to sign right of entry forms to allow dangerous trees to be removed at no cost to them along county easements for the same reason, fear of overzealous enforcement. And don't bother answering these questions with details explaining how their concerns are ill-founded. It won't work. This board is fostering policies that are obviously counter to their stated purposes. If the Health and Safety Code is intended to promote health and safety, how does adopting policies that foster mistrust of the department charged with implementing those policies serve its stated purpose? It doesn't. It's obvious to anybody who doesn't stand to gain something from the shipping container policy that containers on private property used for typical storage purposes pose no safety threat to anyone, and that they're containers, not buildings. The modifications and hazardous uses are already addressed in other parts of the code, so this policy is either superfluous or duplicitous or both. Mr. Short cited the rule that allows him to define containers as structures. This in no way compels him to do so. Think about that. And I challenge you to produce one really good reason for doing so. I don't want my tax money being spent retrofitting every container on county property to meet these standards so that you can use that to justify going after the rest of us with them. Not good use of funds. And on a related note, yeah, some people in HOAs have expressed a desire to use code enforcement to augment their ability to enforce parts of their CC&Rs through the use of code enforcement. Some even suggest this could be funded through fees and fines. Members of the board and staff have said they think it's fair that the recipients of those services should bear the costs. I somewhat agree. So I propose, rather than everybody in the county bearing the cost of services we don't even want, how about the HOAs who do want these services foot more of the bill, kind of like the way Lake Tulloch Association might pay the sheriff to patrol the lake on busy weekends. Just a thought. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Mike Falvey, District 2. I concur with my supervisor, his concerns. My concern as a citizen, this has nothing to do, this has to do with me as a citizen and the worries about who's going to be knocking on my door and coming to my house. I'm going to use a specific example, encroachments off of county roads. So from what I understand, regulations concerning cargo containers go back to 1977. Am I correct in that? 1977, okay. Encroachment permits go back probably farther. You drive around this county and look at the encroachments coming off county roads and tell me what percentage of our driveways don't have a legal encroachment. There's, I don't know how many, but there is a lot of them. So when you get this cargo container thing under control, is that maybe your next target? Do you go knock on some guy's house door and say, you don't have a regulated, a permitted encroachment, and you have to get one or we're closing down your driveway? Is that what you're going to do next? See, that's what I'm concerned about. When you're going to come knocking on my door because you've run out of your revenue stream for the cargo containers, you got to come up with another one to fund these permits, these positions that code compliance has come up with since the UO. What's next? I said it before. That's my big concern. You know, I realize the cannabis industry has their concerns, and I agree with them. My concern is, what are you going to do? When are you going to come after me? A guy who's just trying to stay alive. You know, keep a little money in my pocket, maybe. When are you going to come after me? What's my target? And there will be one, because when the cargo containers have been addressed, what's next? Chicken coops, encroachments, because like I said, there's thousands. You guys, you know, that could be your next target. Encroachments. There aren't any on many parcels. Falls in the same category as a C-van. If you want to make that your next target, I hope you don't. I hope you take my advice, but that's probably what this county is going to be doing, looking for another way to hose the citizens. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Terry McBride. I back Mike. I think what he said is absolutely awesome, and I agree with Jack. I don't want anybody to know what the hell's at my house. I have a responsibility as an individual to have safe things there and not to have dangerous things. I remember when y'all came up and said, well, we're going to have to clean up after the fire because of hazardous waste. And I said, there was a quart of Clorox. That's it, in my entire 10 acres. Because so time comes when you have to take personal responsibility, but also for your safety. And we're becoming a nanny county. And Dennis, I would like to read you something from the Leafly magazine. And this was after you all did the ban, that was going to be so good for the county. Mills scoffs at claims the county is due for catastrophic staff cuts. He insists there will be no cuts in law enforcement personnel who are covered by a different bargaining group, and says the cultivation ban means Calaveras can get by with fewer code enforcement officials. Wait! Let's go after cargo bins. Oh, wait, 806! Who came up with that one? So then they have their jobs. All of us are worried like, holy cow, am I going to end up getting in trouble for this? Things that we never worried about. Of course we want our decks built properly. Of course we want our homes built properly. We have become the nanny county of a nanny state. And it's ridiculous. We need to be responsible for our own safety, our own choices. Any fool that had a cargo like that, if he goes there and a damn thing crashes on him, he deserves it. It's called a Darwin Award. He'll get first place. So, it comes to a point in time where we need to be responsible for ourselves. I don't want you to be my mommy and my daddy. I can take care of myself. Thank you very much. I don't feel like looking over my neighbor's fence to see, oh my God, they've got a cargo chicken coop. Did you get a permit for that? And that's what you're asking for in this county. We want this to be the retirement community. You know why this county is so neat? Because of the families that we raised here. We took less pay. We took less income, so that we could have this beautiful community of ours, so that we could live here and raise our children, and the parents could help on the baseball and the basketball and everything else. Terry was very much involved in that, if I remember correctly, as I was with my sons. And you're taking that away. You're kicking out good people. They're leaving because they're sick of it. But again, as I've said before, there's those of us that aren't going to leave. We're going to stand our ground because we know what is right. And I don't need any nannies. But thank you.
Good afternoon. I'd like to address this shipping container requirements. Shipping containers do not equal a structure. It says right here, containers, cargo containers, freight containers, storage containers, cargo boxes, Connex boxes, everything. They are designed to mount, these containers have been used for storage in Calaveras County for decades. But the use of a shipping container is a structure. Now we're making containers a structure. The only time that it can become a structure is when you use these containers and you turn them into homes. Then you need a permit. If you change the shipping container in any way, say I want to take out the side of it, a portion of it, to put a window in, I've changed it. I want to add electrical. I want to add plumbing for water. I have now changed it. Then you have changed the container to something that could be habitable, which would become technically a structure. Other than that, it is a container. If I want to buy a water container for my property, are you going to tax me on that? Are you going to come out and see what I have in that? What if I decide to store Kool-Aid in it instead of water? Are you going to tax me on that? Do I need a slab under that? It is a container. We just purchased a fuel container for our equipment to replant and take care of our property for the next 25 years. Am I going to be taxed on that? It is a container. So, unless you change it, it does not become a structure. These cargo containers are all across America. No slabs are required because they are a container. They are movable. They can be moved with a forklift. If, again, I'm going to reiterate, you add electrical or water or change it in any way, it becomes a structure. So let's look at this. By converting a container to a structure requires a permit and it will be taxed. Bottom line, revenue. 2 businesses were targeted in this county, one of them Napa, one of them A1 Sharpening. It says right here, Calaveras County Code Compliance Unit has received a complaint. Who was the complaint from? I'd like to know who complained about these 2 businesses. So I'm going to reiterate this. I said it earlier in public comments. What is your agenda? Run the people out of the county by taxing them into oblivion? Is it about the water? Or do you want to bankrupt the county to bring the tobacco industry in to bail you out? No matter what, it's all about the money. Thank you.
Any other public comments?
Jason Campbell, District 5. First off, I gotta apologize. I know it's not nice to keep beating on a dead horse, but here I am, and you know where it's going. Selective enforcement. Mr. Short, you solidified it even further today in this meeting on public record. You also, Mr. Watts. When you guys sit there and you say that you're not actively seeking out every single one of those, what do you guys call that? How do you think it looks to me, one of the guys that's got one of the letters? How do you think it looks to me, one of the guys that's got one of the letters that doesn't match up with any of the other letters that have been sent out? How do you think it looks to me and everybody else when there's only a couple of businesses getting these? You're trying to run businesses. You even said it today, Mr. Short, that this whole thing was motivated by the cannabis site inspections, that you're trying to address all these issues that you've seen on cannabis sites. I don't understand how you guys can keep talking in circles denying the fact that it's selective enforcement when you're sitting right there saying that that's exactly what it is. What should we call it? You're advocating for public health and safety like these storage containers are going to attack somebody, jump up off the ground, roll over. Someone's going to drown in one. Someone's going to get electrocuted in one. And I can understand that if they have poorly installed electrical, whatever, it needs an electrical permit, address it with that. The fact of the matter is, you want to advocate public health and safety? Let's go back to that swimming pool at the end of my road, Mr. Short, that your compliance officer supposedly can't turn a blind eye to. How come it's been pointed out several times in this meeting to you in your office? How come I've been out of town for a week and I come home, there's still water in that pool? There's still no fence around that property. I'd also like to point out the fact that there is no possible way that I can have any public health and safety risk on my property if there's no public access to my property. It's completely fenced and has a electric locking gate. You're not coming on that property without my permission. Let my homeowner's insurance deal with it. If somebody trespasses on my property, gets injured, let the homeowner's insurance deal with it. This is undeniably selective enforcement. I know your code officers drive past these things multiple times a day. The information that you presented in your display today is inaccurate. There's more people sitting in this room than the amount of information that you've stated has gone out. Actions have gone out. This is transparency, honesty. Come on, guys, get it together.
Other public comments?
Dennis is directing the militarization of code enforcement with this 806 to bolster his failing reattempt at prohibition and increasing the county's structural deficit to $9.7 million at the same time. The only job growth in Calaveras is in county government. He hired a disassociated cosmopolitan building director from Urban SAC to impose draconian interpretations of building codes, attacked the short-sighted one is more than willing to take because he doesn't know anyone here besides Dennis and Cox. Shipping containers are not structures. Raising fees and fines to untenable levels for most, except large sprawl developers, solely in order to maintain recently hired county positions is deplorable. These new hires were derived from a self-sustaining program Dennis dismantled. all in lieu of a scheme based on increased fees and punitive fines to be carried out by revenue-generating lawyers like Silver and Wright, because, well, we all know Deputy Counsel Ethan Turner just really isn't up to the task, even though his cutting and pasting skills are pretty good. Most of the deficit will ultimately be paid for by the larger local citizenry under your flawed plan, so that HOA rules can be maintained by the county instead of private entities that just can't figure out how to self-enforce. This is your priority budgeting scheme we've waited so long for, Dennis? Is this yours or Cox's idea of job creation? Making code enforcement a, quote, self-funded enterprise does not benefit the majority. A self-cannibalizing industry is not the answer to Calaveras' problems. The people of this great county will not stand for punitive ordinances like the update to 806 you've been pushing for, Dennis. Nor will they stand for your duplicitous, ham-hocked implementation of Cox's policies to promote suburban sprawl for his developer friends. Rural lives matter here. No matter how hard the two of you self-aggrandized, self-important men try to suburbanize this county and all of its residents through oppressive ordinances. We will not sit idly by and allow you to fund increased local government at the expense of our rural quality of life. Dennis, you and Cox have stained the fabric of our rural community with your divisiveness. We are rising from the ashes, and the future we shall all build together will not be burdened nor funded by poorly conceived punitive policies at our own expense.
Any other public comments?
Cliff Edson, District 1. Too much government. Too much government. That's what we have. You guys want to know everything about everybody, what they have in every structure, the house, trunks of cars. It's too much government. People moved up here to live a life of freedom. And what you're bringing is not freedom. You're bringing too much government into our private lives. They do that in other countries. I don't think we should do it here. There are people that have had these containers on their property for 40, 50 years. And now, and a lot of seniors out there have had them that long. And now you got them all up, pretty upset. And it's not good for them to have to deal with that. And you're going to come on their property and you're going to tell them, look, you're going to have to get a permit for that after 50 years. That's not very good planning at all. It's not a very good idea to upset your constituents that way. What's next? You're going to tell them what color house they can paint? What kind of car they can drive? Is that next? Because it seems like it's going that way. Why don't you consider grandfathering, at least? Because when people have stuff, and then you come in and you try to change it for them, change is hard. If you grandfathered something in, then whoever comes in next knows the rules. The rules aren't being changed on them. Personally, I don't want you on my property at all. At all. And have you been flying over, Dennis, lately? Kind of noticed a blue plane up there, buzzing people. Please stay off of our property. If you want to know what's in the container, it's probably like old dolls, clothing, stuff that people just can't get rid of. Don't punish everybody for a few people that are making it hard on themselves. Don't punish everybody.
Hello, Board. Trevor Whitkey. I have a number of concerns with the county's new policy regarding shipping containers. First, this policy was adopted behind closed doors without any public input or awareness. That is why you're getting so much flack about it. That is why people are so concerned about it. Second, this policy change was completely unnecessary. There are already rules prohibiting the safety hazards pictured in the presentations. These rules don't address electrical or hazardous materials. These rules are about foundations. That's it. The building department does not actually regulate a lot of the things that Ed's trying to talk about. To the extent that code enforcement does regulate these issues, there are already codes on the books. These rules have nothing to do with what is inside of the container. The rules are right here. Nothing in them talks about actual contents in the containers. This policy was adopted without any data. We don't know how many containers there are in the county. According to Ed Short on May 22nd, there are many thousands. We don't know how much a permit actually costs. This document says that the cost for a permanent permit is to be determined. We don't know the cost of engineering, labor, materials. Maybe Terry can get back up and give us an estimate of how much it cost. I would say that if it's based on Ed's comment that it costs $200 to $300 per permit for a permanent engineered shipping container, $250 to $500 for the engineer cost, plus another $600 to $800 for labor and materials, we're talking about basically $1,000 to $1,500 for every single one of these. Now, if there are thousands of these in the county, that means that we're thousands times thousands equals millions. Did anybody actually look at the economic impact this policy would have on our community? If you didn't actually look at the economic impact this policy is going to have on the community, businesses like Napa, residents like Jason, and the 13 shipping containers that are here in the county that aren't even compliant, the taxpayers don't know the cost of the policies that you're implementing. You should rein in your building department chief because he's engaging in policy making without direction from the board and without consensus from the board. And on January 28th, Dennis Mills, you sent an email saying that policy comes from the board through consensus. If that's the case, then why haven't you had consensus on this issue, brought this up in a public hearing with an action item where it can be decided and where the public can actually be informed of this ahead of time, as opposed to continually doing these behind the door, closed door operations? Finally, this policy change was adopted to target growers. Policy was initiated under the Cannabis Regulatory Program. The policy was created and implemented by code enforcement personnel. Every enforcement action prior to May 22nd was carried out during site inspections on cannabis sites. Additionally, Thomas Watts drafted the memo after the May 22nd Board of Supervisors meeting. Thomas Watts' salary comes from cannabis registry funds.
Chair, may I interrupt for a second? I thought this was what we were going to do if we're going to have town hall meetings, how we're going to proceed on it.
No, this has to do shipping containers.
Okay.
Good afternoon. Chris John Colts, District 2. It's intellectually dishonest to say that driving the shipping container complaints by public complaint isn't selective enforcement. It was stated earlier that the majority of the shipping containers were found on cannabis properties during inspections for the UO. Our names were published by the county. Everybody knows who all the cannabis registrants were and where they live. All of the data is on Google Maps for anybody who is against us, or against anybody for that matter, to simply look at each registrant's property and identify every shipping container, whether or not they can even see it from the road or legitimately see it themselves, and file a complaint. So one person could file 700 complaints tomorrow, and how that isn't selective enforcement is beyond me. I could put 20 10 by 12 structures on my property and load them up with whatever I want to. I don't do this because I care about the county and the environment, and I'm not interested in creating problems for the fire people. I don't believe any citizen is intentionally trying to create problems for fire response. Most of us work very hard to clear our property so that fire is safe and can save our things, save our possessions if things go bad. The idea that the shipping container is somehow different from me putting up all these structures, actual structures, not a container, seems to be a stretch. Supervisor Garamendi has brought up a couple times last week. There's no trust here. The fear of code compliance is real, and I'll tell you my story. When I came here before the fire. My first visit was to code compliance to find out about my property and what would be required to rebuild the property and make it legal. It was a positive experience, and when I visited with other people who had lived here for many years, they were surprised and said, "Why did you do that? You should never go to code compliance. You should just do what you need to do and hope they don't find out later." And I said, "Well, I went to these guys. They were great. They came and did a walkthrough of my property. He's going to permit this. He told me how I can reestablish the house. He even did an investigation that the house had been assessed prior, and it was all very positive, and we were ready to go forward, and the fire happened, and the UO happened. And here we are today. I would never apply for a building permit in Calaveras County given this current situation. I would never invite code compliance to come on my property voluntarily. It's made my perspective the perspective of those who lived here before me, and that's sad. I came here to improve Calaveras, to add what I could to the community and to my property, and now I don't feel that I have a legitimate opportunity to do that any longer, and actually I'm not sure that I want to.
Any other public comments? Seeing none, we'll close public comments. Bring it back to the board. Supervisor Clapp, your light's on. You have comments?
Yeah, I have some. I think it's more of a zoning issue than anything else. I hate to say this, but I sort of agreed with Cliff Edson. I think at lunch I was telling you that about grandfathering some of them in. But I think it's just more of a zoning. We have to get where they can go, where they shouldn't be, where they are. I mean, I think that's more the problem than the code part.
Supervisor Oliveira?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to go back to my first comments regarding access to shipping containers and the reference as to structures. And thank goodness we have the sheriff here. Sheriff, can I address a question to you? If you'll approach the podium, please. Sorry, you're not getting the afternoon off.
That's okay. I came here just in case.
Do we need a search warrant to look into a container on private property?
Yeah, I have to agree with Supervisor Garamendi about, and I hate to disagree with anybody, but you're not looking at my stuff. I mean, it takes a search warrant for me to look into anything. We have had containers in our county that have marijuana grows in them. We've had them that have had chemicals for marijuana grows in them. So it's not like the containers haven't been a part of the marijuana industry in our county. Years ago, we actually had one that had what they call a Ferris wheel inside of it. Plants were only about this big, but the buds were like this big. So they're used for illegal activities. We've had containers where we've had chop shops in them. When I got shot, that was one of them. It was a chop shop on Railroad Flat. So they are used for illegal activities, but as a sheriff's office, we have to do our due diligence and get a search warrant from a judge to go into that container.
And how do you develop probable cause for a search warrant?
A lot of investigation.
Drive by and see a container parked on a private property parcel and say, I want a search warrant to get that container open.
No, it starts with a complaint from a neighbor with some suspicious activity. We start doing our research, and it could take a month or 2 months. That chop shop that I talked about took us about 6 months to get enough information to get a search warrant. So it's not just, hey, they have a container, let's go take a look. I can't do that.
If if containers are labeled as structures, that also requires a search warrant, correct?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Thank you, Sheriff.
Just so you know, and the public knows, that if the mailman can go there, a cop can go there, is the rule of thumb.
Okay. All right, thank you. I've been contacted by several people regarding this issue prior to this meeting. And one of the issues that was brought up was the fact that if these are structures, are they subject to any type of real property tax as other structures on property? I don't know that answer. Maybe we should ask our assessor, but could this be a basis for a tax? It is a structure.
That's a good question for a tax assessor.
Yeah, could be an improvement, couldn't it? Especially if it's permitted. That's a question we may have to answer down the road.
Supervisor Garamendi?
Thank you. That's a very good question, Mike. I'd like to know the answer to that, too. It has impact on my next point. Mr. Short, if our primary concern is, say by you and Supervisor Mills, is health and safety, maybe we could, getting account of these things, maybe we could figure out some sort of grandfathering amnesty program for 2 years where by mail you could send in a photograph, if counting them is our highest priority. No one's ever going to tell you what's inside all their stuff. I'm sure there's people that use them for bad things. There are people that use guns for bad things. Doesn't mean we go out and outlaw them. So I think we just need to be very cautious. I'd love to see a way to get, if it's of vital importance for this county to catalog where all these things are and they're not plugged in, I think there is a difference between having electrified and plumbing. I get all that. That's a different thing. But if it's just about knowing where these things are, maybe come up with an amnesty program where somebody like me can mail in a letter to you with a photo and say, yes, I've got it. Yeah. And you've got a catalog. And going forward, you could take a look at the future and say, maybe if I got 2, I'd have to get the next one. But pretty hard to reach back and start punishing people for activities that have been, if not permitted, certainly allowed in our county. So that would be my only takeaway from this study.
Can I make a point of clarity about what I meant? What need to know what's inside is really what use is being used for the structure determines the occupancy. So when it comes to H occupancies, it means hazardous material quantities. That's what I was referring to, commercial, not residential or anything like that. We don't really care what's in residential.
Well, you said you need to know what's in every building, and I think I would just check the box
The
stuff.
the use, what determines the use, yeah.
Supervisor Mills?
So I want to go back to my point that we need to hear from our local fire districts. We need to hear from them as to what they feel would be a concern, and I'm sure the good majority of them are no concern at all. But the ones that could be of concern could be life-threatening if given the wrong situation at the wrong time. That is my primary thought, is having heard from them on numerous fires in District 4, what they've run into. I don't know about District 2, not on District 1 or any other location, but I think it really does come down to the modifications. How is it being used? If it's not modified, the potential just isn't there. But where there is modification, I certainly don't want to be the one responsible for putting our first responders into a life-threatening situation. It's because we haven't done our due diligence and the owner hasn't done their due diligence to ensure the safety of those that might be there. And it might not even be a first responder, it might be a kid. It could be anybody. But the point still is that where modifications have occurred or where you have a dangerous situation, we have a responsibility to ensure that that's corrected. And we need to be very careful about deciding whether or not we're going to enforce state laws or ICC rules, things like that. That puts us in a very precarious place, and I just caution the board not to run down that road too fast.
Point of clarification on modification. When I was researching this, other jurisdictions, when they write that verbiage, when they say any form of modification that changes its use, that could be a change of occupancy. It doesn't mean a physical change, but a physical modification to the use, which can change it to an H occupancy, which is also a modification.
My comments on this. I don't see, I'm for the grandfather thing, and I think I've had a conversation with that. I can't see something that's been there 41 years without any problems. is now being required or going to have subject to some type of code. It's been there. It's not something that is going to move. So I'm looking at some amnesty here and some grandfathering in. I'm also looking at Amador, what they have on their restriction form. They're permitted in most zones. 1 container on parcels 6 acres or smaller. Must meet setbacks and other development standards, which I understand the setback part of it. Development standards can include anything. And I'm looking at some of the pictures. I'm assuming when they say development standards, they're not set up by some of the pictures that I saw on stilts. I'm thinking level ground is what they're meaning, as long as it's on level ground. And there's no permit required unless the container is altered. And my take on the altering is if you add electricity to it, if you put plumbing in it, or you put a window in it, or put a door in it, you've altered it, other than what it came and it sat down on. That I could understand, because you are altering it, and you are altering it on the structural portion of it if you're adding a window, another door on the side. Structurally, you're changing that container, and that could be, and Terry could come into involvement on that and what needs to be fortified for the opening or what have you in the container. That's what I'm looking at. But as far as going down the path of trying to stir up all of this on containers that obviously have been sitting in place for a number of years and are stable and are not up on stilts or blocks of wood that look like they're staggered in and falling over, that is a safety code issue, no matter what anybody says about it, and that needs to be dealt with. But as far as the rest of it, I'm in agreement on the grandfather thing. I think if you've been there 41 years, I don't see it going anywhere tomorrow or the next day. And I think it's undue on a lot of the people that are stressing now on several different items, be it fire or business or what have you. I don't think we need to put that burden on them. I think we had that conversation the other day. So that's where I'm at on it. Okay.
Mr. Chair, further comments?
Yes.
I also agree with the grandfathering aspect of this issue. But to address Supervisor Mills' issue, and I understand his concern, I would entertain some type of method to the International Fire Coding placard systems. I don't know if you're aware of, I know you are, sir. Or where you do have contents in there in certain quantities that require placarding. I would like to see a process like that, at least to give some advance warnings to our first responders. The examples shown here, most definitely, that's why we need this type of regulation for these types of situations. I'm very much concerned about the fact that how we're going to enforce this, and the question I would ask is, if you have a permit, does that give the right for any time of inspection like our cultivation UO? How are we going to police that? If we have a container sitting out in the field that meets all setbacks, and we don't have any indication by placarding or no electrical to it or anything else that's set on level ground, and it doesn't appear to be a hazard to any type of tipping over or something, what gives us the right to go in there and say what's in there? Now we're drawing that line on personal rights, property rights, things of that sort. And we deal with that in law enforcement. We have methods and procedures. We have case law and we have rules and laws. Unfortunately, some of those laws are not all the best in the world. And we try to find the good ones and we try to take care of the bad ones. But there's another factor that you really need to be aware of. And that is, if you abuse a law, you'll lose the law. And that's what I don't want to do here. I don't want to be in a position where we abuse this law and then we lose it. So we have to be very smart in what we do here. Mr. Short, your staff has done a great job. Mr. Maurer, you've done a great job. But I think you've had the opportunity to listen to our concerns as board members, but also from the public and the folks that are affected by this. And in my opinion, it's every person in this county, no matter what your views are on marijuana. It's every person that has established their livelihood, their families, and what they've done for hundreds of years. That's why I'm very supportive of the grandfathering clause. Thank you, Chair.
Mr. Short, I want to point out some of the concerns that are going on here, but just to point out, I can build a 10 by 12 building, 10 by 12, and without a permit, and I can store anything in there because you don't know it's there. It's never been permitted. I can put anything in that thing. I can build another one over there and put anything in it that I want without you knowing or telling anybody what's in it. This happens, and we're not addressing those because that's not within the code. We're allowed to do that. I think going down this path with the containers, you know, it's kind of a slippery slope here. You're right. If I had a container, I don't have a container. I wouldn't let you come and knock on my door and tell me you need to go look in my container to find out what I have in it. That's my personal property and my personal views of what I want to put in that thing. But there are, without storage shed, there are a number, if not thousands, of 10 by 12 or 10 by 10 buildings that unless you put electricity to it or you put plumbing to it, you don't need a permit for. And who knows what are in all of those sheds, what people are storing in those things. So to try and get a handle on, I understand the fire code, what you're talking about, but you could be opening up the door. I think maybe at some time we could have a conversation with the fire chiefs on their views on it and get what they have, you know, what they're dealing with, if anything. We had somebody talk today about through the Butte fire, the storage containers are the only things left. So are we talking about something that we don't need to talk about here? I think we should have, at least at some point, a conversation if this comes back on how we're going to handle it, and have the fire chief come and speak to us about it. So.
I just want to make a point of clarity. Chair, I totally agree with you on all that. The residential, we're not very concerned with their contents or anything. If you read the policy, it's just put it on flat and we're done with it. Meets the zoning. It's the commercial. I do want to point out that Amador had the same issue. It's about the fire codes. It's the storage of hazardous material that triggers those H occupancies. So that's really the issue we need to have the discussion about, is how do we handle the commercial hazardous material quantities, because you're not going to ever reach that in a residential storage sheds. It's the commercial where you have the issue, and they have that in their code also. So that's just let you know.
And I'm familiar with that because, like I said, I had fire comes and inspects my building all the time for hazardous. Correct. So that's a separate issue on itself versus the code on the storage containers and how they're anchored down. You want to call them anchored down or what? Because once you anchor something down, it becomes permanent, and that could trigger a tax code. When it's not anchored down, it's considered mobile because you can pick it up and move it. So, Mr. Mills.
It's interesting, in CAL FIRE, they have what's called the Amador Plan.
They have the Amador Plan?
They do. And having read the Amador rules that Mr. Short has referred to, I do like what they have put together. If grandfathering of those containers that are not modified or altered, if they are not causing a structural hazard, we have really no reason to be concerned about it. It's the other ones that can put us and everybody in a predicament. And those are the ones I would be wanting to talk about. I'm certain that, because I personally have built a 10 by 10 and never put electricity in it, but I can imagine how easy it is to do. And then the next thing you know, you're in a whole different set of rules. So I just want to be sure that we have a good, thorough discussion on this, and that we don't spend a lot of time tracking off onto something that is creating an unnecessary situation for staff to spend a lot of time, but at the same time, you know, the ICC rules are still going to be there. We can't avoid them, and they're only going to get worse with every passing legislative session, if you want to call it that. So I appreciate the time the staff has put into this. Photographs, I think, are especially ugly and pointed, and do bring home the point of, I think somebody had talked about, you know, people can make their own mistakes. Years ago, I used to call it gene pool modification. How things happen, but where a container is just on a property and it's got storage, it's private property, I care less what's inside of it. But I know that the fire agencies have had concerns, and I'm going to continue to push forward with one and have that conversation with them. Thank you, Chair.
All right, this was informational, so
That's it, yes.
That's it, thank you. And we're going to take a 5-minute break here.
Okay.
All right, we are back from break. Madam Clerk, item number 30 of the day.
Item 30 is from Code Compliance to provide direction to staff with respect to seeking public input on the amendment to Chapter 8.06 of the County Code. This discussion will not include the content of the proposed 8.06, nor will it include discussion of the fee schedule. It will be a discussion solely to determine if the town hall format is the most strategic means of gathering relevant public input.
And at this point, I want to make it perfectly clear to anybody who wants to come up and speak, you have the right to come up and speak. But if we start going off on 806 or fee schedules, I will hammer you down and keep you on topic. This is give staff direction solely on town hall meetings and whether they're needed or some other format that we'd like to see in order to get the information out. Okay? So going forward, Mr. Short? You're good. That's it. You're on.
Okay, Chair and Board again, thank you for, we're putting this on the agenda again because I guess the board was pulled and we put it on the agenda so that we can get direction from the board relative to the town hall meetings and what kind of methodologies and what you want us to do. So we're seeking direction from the board. So this is a discussion for the board to give us direction.
So, do I have any board input at this time? Are we looking for individual ones in each district, one or two grand ones? No town halls at all? Look at some other way of getting information out before it comes back to us? Supervisor Garamendi, you had your light on first.
All right, you made a great line, Supervisor Tuffanelli, earlier in the item before this. You said, are we talking about what we don't need to talk about? I think I'm well on the record that 8.06 is something we don't need to talk about. I would obviously prefer that this was tabled for, put into next year, but that's not on the agenda today. I have a hard time talking about it all or having a community meeting without a fee schedule, because we don't really know what it's going to turn out. So my concern is, why are we doing this at all? And then second question is, how can we do this without even knowing what the fees are attached to it? So I would propose that we table the whole thing.
Supervisor Oliveira, your light's on.
Jesus Christ.
He stole my thunder. I agree with Supervisor Garamendi. We need to talk about all the information. Maybe when we get that information, we can revisit this and say if town halls are the proper venue to discuss this. Otherwise, I think we're just spinning our wheels at this time.
Fair enough. Supervisor Mills?
I can count to 3. Let's go home.
All right, so we are giving staff direction, from what I'm hearing, at least 3 and maybe 4 or 5 of us to put this whole thing on hold until
another day,
which is down the road, or
never.
A year from now, next year, January. I would like to hear, so we have some direction. Being told to shelf it right now, but what does that mean?
Bring back first of the year.
Can you turn your microphone on, please, Supervisor Clapp?
Let's bring it back to first of the year.
Bring it back at the first of the year. Supervisor Mills, your light's on. You have any comments on that?
No.
Supervisor Oliveira?
I want to make sure that we have the proper information. And I'm going to ask staff, is this a situation where we're going to have the information available to go ahead and discuss this issue? I mean, can we get a fee schedule so we can discuss 806 and the fee schedule and determine the town hall meetings if we go that route? That's my concern. Can we get that? And if we can, an estimated timeline of when that can happen.
Well, I guess it's a two-part question. I think if you want to know about the fee schedules, our consultant is recommending that we do a workshop maybe with the board ahead of time. So there's two fee schedules. There's the building fee schedule. We don't want to get that mixed up in here at all with that one. But the code enforcement that goes attached with 8.06, that works in harmony, that we could do a workshop prior to is talking about. So you can decide to just table the code enforcement fees and go through a workshop. That's one way to do it, and then come back.
All right. We're getting a little bit off
Right.
topic here, so.
Right.
The question is, bringing back this item and this topic, if we wait till the first of the year, will you have time enough to get all the information needed to present to the board?
Yes.
That you will. So
Oh, yeah.
if we delay it to the first of the year,
Plenty of time.
that's plenty of time for you to, we'll have everything together for us
Right.
coming back. Does that answer your question, Supervisor Oliveira?
Yes.
Okay, Supervisor Garamendi?
Yeah, I would say just not like first of the year, but like perhaps the end of January, we could talk about whether we want to talk about this some more.
Everybody agree on that? Okay, let's open it up for public. Any public comments pertaining to that schedule or any other schedule?
Yes, Jason Campbell, District 5. So I'm understanding that we're tabling basically everything, no town halls. So what's expected of the public at this point? Should we just disregard all the letters that we received? Should we just forget about this whole thing for right now? Let's get some crystal clarity. Let's make a public statement right now. What are we supposed to be doing? Because this whole thing is crazy and confusing. Some of us have letters, some of us don't. Me personally, my letter had multiple information on it. It had a 20-day timeline that's come and gone. Fortunately, I haven't heard anything else. I'm really confused. I don't know what the heck is going on.
Are we to talk about town hall meetings?
Town hall meetings or any other way of getting the information out?
When y'all decided to limit your meetings to 2 a month, I thought it was absolutely imperative that you held town hall meetings individually from each district on the days that you didn't have regular meetings. I would like to see that happen. I want to see y'all have town hall meetings where we can come and talk and, for as long as we need to express the opinion that we have instead of being limited to 3 minutes. And if that includes talking about 8.06 or the fees or any of that, I'm all in favor of it. But I think you should have been doing that all along so you don't seem like you're so isolated and you're marginalizing our opinions and our feelings about everything. Town hall meetings, yeah, do it. On the town hall meetings, I think it's a great idea. It really would be. It would allow people to get to know their supervisors all the more, to express whatever their feelings are, whether the supervisor wants to hear it or not. It's part of your job. The other is, as we're being informed of how 806 or any other is great, we want to make sure that the education isn't indoctrination and that we're informing people of the reasoning and remembering, again, we don't want to be a nanny county. It's bad enough we're in a nanny state. Thank you.
Other public comments?
Catherine Steyer, District 1. I just want to say, I agree. I would love to see town hall meetings. I'd love to see them in the evening. I have to take a day off work every time I come and have a meeting with you guys. So I would love to see town hall meetings, not just about this issue, about all of the issues that are going on in this county. I also want to say, I agree with Jason. January seems a long time to wait in a state of not knowing what's going to be going on, or even longer than January. I hear, I'm getting a little bit of a reprieve, but at the same time, it just means, okay, I'm just going to have all this hanging over my head for this much longer, until the real final decision is made. So I agree with Jason. I would love to see an actual, at this point in time at least, we are not enforcing this. We're not going to bug you anymore for the next 6 months or whatever time period it is. Knowing that you guys are going to come back in January, February is really kind of a cloud over our head as a business. It's going to be tax time. It's going to be very frustrating. So I'll just maybe leave it at that because, as a business, this has been a very frustrating experience. And I wouldn't want to, I'd like to share my opinion more, but as you said, this is just about the town halls. So, thank you.
Town hall meetings.
Thanks, my time. So, the agenda item that was presented doesn't really make any sense. The agenda item printout has basically no information on it. You said that we were going to discuss the best means or an alternative means of gathering information. I don't see any alternative in here allowed. I also don't see any information about the cost of these town hall meetings. So we have a lack of information as to how to inform the public about these actual meetings. It's unclear as to whether or not the board is ever going to appropriately agendize this issue. According to Megan Stedfeld in her reply to a cure and correct letter regarding a Brown Act violation based on the motion that was adopted back on July 10th, she has said that the board simply directed staff to engage in further fact-finding information. That would mean that these town halls, if they are to go forward based on the authorization that was made on the July 10th motion, that they would be limited to solely gathering information. There would be no capacity for staff to explain the 8.06 update. There would be no ability to explain the fee schedule update. They would strictly be limited to fact-finding gathering purposes. Now, as it stands at this point, we've had a non-agendized discussion back on July 10th about town halls that came up after public comment. The board decided to hold these town halls. We then asked, are you going to disclose the cost, the time, the content, the format, etc.? We were told the board does not have to do that because the board doesn't actually have to put it on an agenda. All they have to do is direct staff to hold these meetings. It comes back on an agenda item to have the discussion, and now you're kicking the can down to January based on a motion that was made on July 10th, and the public has never been given any actual information about this, and this item has never actually been presented as an action item on an agenda. All of this could be cleared up, and all of these problems could be resolved, and you guys would look a lot better at your jobs if you just followed basic standards and procedures. Put it on the agenda as an action item in January or whenever, and we'll talk about it then.
Mike Falvey, District 2. generally, I think town hall meetings are fine, but in this specific case, I think it would be a complete waste of county funds. They're not free. I think that a poll should be taken of the board to determine, because it looks to me like there's at least 3 votes on grandfathering the C-bands. Take a poll and see where the vote's going to go. If you're going to vote to grandfather, why would you have to have these meetings? Come up with any regulations, any fee schedules, et cetera, et cetera. So just table the subject and maybe poll the board. Maybe you could poll the board now and find out if that's where they're interested in going. I mean, I don't know the rules, but if you table something, if you're going to have the votes to eliminate it, why not do it now, get it over with?
We're getting a little bit off target here.
No, I'm talking about town meetings.
Okay.
Town meetings, this is a town meeting on this subject would be a waste of time if you're going to table the subject. It'd be a complete waste of time / county funds, just like that thing back there is a waste of county funds. You know, don't do it. You don't have to have town meetings. Take a poll of the board, table the whole thing.
Marty Crane. So I keep hearing the word town hall meetings and regular town hall meetings, and I'm thinking, well, I remember when Supervisor Kearney had his, quote, office time or his town hall meeting, no one ever came to visit him except Bonnie. And I mean, literally, hardly, maybe one person one time went. And so we just quit doing it. And I've seen that happen with other supervisors as well. And so if you're going to have town hall meetings, that gives you the idea that you've got a bunch of people coming for a meeting. Well, just be prepared that you may have 2 people. Or I think if you're going to have a town hall meeting, it ought to be on a specific subject, main subject, and then have some Q&A or something after on variety of things. But it ought to have one. It seems to me that if you want people to come out, they're going to have to come out about something that's coming up that they're going to have to deal with, you know, instead of having to deal with everything all at once. You know, you've got something, we keep having these big things sprung on, it feels like they're sprung on us. And if you're going to have a town hall meeting, let's talk about those ahead of time. And I'm not wild about the idea that once a month we're going to have a town hall meeting. You know, I mean, you could try it, but just don't be surprised if people just don't come. So anyway, there is that too.
So the town halls for purposes of information gathering, did you want input from the public, or did you want to, as Terry O'Brien said, indoctrinate us into this new way of thinking? We know that during the TOT tax poll, they found that the majority of people are not happy with the direction of the county. I don't know that it's necessary to have town halls. You know, it does somewhat cure and correct, or it's an effort to correct the procedural error on July 10th. If to have these about 8-6, but it sounds like you need to open up a town hall situation for more people to participate in government. If, you know, the poll says that people aren't happy with the direction. So I would propose that every district have a town hall to hear from their people, that you get the word out through more than just Valley Spring News, which does not cover the whole county. And you actually listen to the people, because I have a feeling that some of you have your minds made up long before these meetings. And, you know, based on the discussion and the voting block, you don't seem terribly interested in what we have to say. You don't answer questions. You don't act on, you know, I feel like we're not communicating, and we need to find a way to communicate. And so I would like to see town halls in every district, not combining D1 and D5. You know, I'm not sure why D5 doesn't deserve their own town hall. I think it's important that you hear from your constituents. I think it's important that you listen to us. And I think it's really important that you stop condescending to us. We're not dumb hicks. We're with the times, we're educated, we all have internets, we all can educate ourselves just fine on this stuff. So please, start listening to people, not just the people you agree with, but the people that you're harming through your policies. And that's a lot of us. I think it's absolutely unconscionable that a man would have to walk out of here today and still have a big cloud over his head about these containers. I think you're picking on people, and it's not okay. Thank you.
Town halls. I had a few. Sometimes they're successful, sometimes they're not. But if you want to have meetings with your constituents, then you should go out and have meetings in your own district and bring that back to your board meeting, in my opinion. Because if over two of you go to a hall, it's going to be an official meeting, and you're going to have to follow. You're going to have to run it like this meeting. And that doesn't necessarily allow that communication. I think that is really important for people to communicate to you, and you are able to communicate back with them. So I know it's kind of scary sometimes to have these meetings because you don't know what you're going to walk into. I've walked into a few myself. So that's how I feel about town halls. They're expensive. You got staff, you got to transfer everything. You got your CCTV, has to bring over all the audio equipment, video equipment, things like that. It costs money. And you can do the same thing right here where it's already set up. Today, we didn't have a whole bunch of people show up for this, right? But there's a whole bunch of people that are interested, but still, the crowd isn't, flowing out into every area in the gazebo. So I think these meetings are good. I just think that it would be really nice if you went out and talked to your constituents, because I've talked to a lot of folks out there, businesses especially, and they're not really happy with this container thing. I'll tell you, it's kind of a situation. The other thing is please make a statement to drop the enforcement, to to take this burden off of people until you actually take it on. And that means having all your information and everything to take it on, and take it on here in the chambers. Thank you.
Okay. I asked if you were okay. I'm alive yet.
I think that transparency and the whole picture should be there before any kind of meetings should occur, because you can't make any decision when part of the facts are missing. People should know what kind of fees they're looking at, and until they get figured out, the general public can't make an informed decision. And if you guys even don't know the fees, you can't make an informed decision. And I think that it should all be handled here. So that's all I've got to say. Thank you.
Any other public comments?
Yeah, it's kind of hard to have any organized thought for a comment under the circumstances. The lack of clarity is astounding. But to continue on the theme that I started this morning and has stuck with all of my comments so far today, it keeps coming back to trust, both between the public and the board and the public and staff and the board and each other and staff and the board and so on and so on. The reason I asked to correct what I see as a Brown Act violation in the way that the town halls were ordered is there was the only clue as to what they looked like was contained in Supervisor Mills's motion, which said a town hall in all of the districts to inform people and allow input. That's pretty close to a quote. I don't have it in front of me. Which raised red flags for me, like other people here today. I'm not looking to be informed. I can do that on my own. I'm perfectly capable. I'm looking for opportunities for the public to inform you of things you don't know, which is what's in our heads. You know, as soon as that directive was issued, after I've seen other people's PRAs of emails, I see staff immediately acting. The words were a town hall in every district, and yet I see internal emails about consolidating town halls with multiple districts. And in the case of D4, kind of almost like getting two for the price of one. One just for the town of Copper, and another to be shared with D3 apparently. And I personally support every supervisor having to stand on his own 2 feet, look people in the face, and answer their questions yourself, so we know what you personally are made of, not anything other than that. And that clock makes me so unable to think. But yeah, the point is, to me, that the public be able to participate in a discussion about what town halls look like, how they're constructed, what their format is, what their purpose is. Is this a staff presentation to persuade the public, or is this the public's opportunity to persuade our elected officials and maybe be heard by staff? And I guess that's all I'm going to have for today. So thank you. And yeah, I wouldn't be mind if you left it to the next board instead of using it as an election opportunity. Thanks.
Any other public comments? Seeing none, close public comments. Bring it back to the board for staff direction.
Mr. Chair, I do share a concern. Are those pending cases now, how does that affect if we push this thing out to January?
It has no effect.
Okay.
8.06 is a proposed amendment to the current 8.06, and there is an 8.06 currently in effect. And so we have an administrative enforcement statute like we've always had, and what we're pushing off is amendments to it.
Okay.
So all enforcement activity that's currently ongoing is pursuant to the existing 8.06.
Good. I want to make sure that was perfectly clear.
Yeah, so we're just going with the current 806.
Right.
And none of the amendments that brought forward. So we talked about allowing some time and maybe bringing it back next year and discussing whether we would have town hall meetings with it when all the information is put together. Are we still in agreement on that? Are we all still looking to sometime in January readdress this and have a presentation to us at that time on where we stand and how to go forward?
I'm in agreement, Mr. Chair, but I want to make sure that all that information is available at the time that we sit down and discuss a town hall meeting schedule, if you will, if that's what we're going to do.
Yeah, and I think that's what we're allowing him time to do. He said that would be plenty of time.
I want to make sure that that's accomplished.
Because I'm in agreement. My comment at that time when it was brought to us was, we don't have all the information. Why is this coming to us now? We need to have all of the information at one time for everybody to digest, not only us, but the public. So we know what's going on as far as all the schedules and everything else. So is that good enough for direction for you, staff? Okay. That was informational, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
Moving on to supervisor announcements. Madam Clerk.
In compliance with AB 1234, chaptered as Government Code Section 53232.3D, board members shall provide brief reports on meetings they attended at the expense of the local agency at the next regular meeting of the legislative body. This report is required to include meetings attended for which there has been expense reimbursement, such as mileage, meals, lodging, etc., but may also, at the board member's discretion, include any other meetings attended by the supervisor on behalf of the county.
Supervisor Clapp, I see your light's on. You're willing to jump right in and tell us. You did not attend any meetings, okay? That you billed the county for. Supervisor Mills.
I didn't attend any meetings I billed the county for, but I've sure been living in the district lately. The storm damage for Diamond 20's road repairs are pretty much completed. And the people who live in Diamond 20 are absolutely ecstatic with the quality of work Public Works has done on those roads. I've had a meeting with people who live in South Horseshoe yesterday afternoon over lunch. No complaints at all. So I think they solved the problem for a longer term with how they handled it, and they're to be commended for the work.
Supervisor Garamendi, your light's on.
A couple things to talk about. We had Fish and Game Commission meeting last week. We're going to plant 400 pounds of trout in the Stanislaus River. The state of California hasn't been doing it, and so Fish and Game Commission allowed to do it. And our chair, Mr. Severud, is got a crew together. We're going to haul them down by buckets, but we wanted our tourists and our residents to have the opportunity to catch a fish before the season was over. So we're getting them in before Labor Day.
How many fish is 400 pounds?
A whole lot of fish.
A whole lot of fish?
Whole lot of fish.
Okay.
So that's exciting stuff. So, you know, we won't give you, it's undisclosed location, so you're not sitting there with the net. But should be good for, so get the tourists up here for the last push on Labor Day. We had West Point Town Hall last week. I referred to it earlier. It was good. We had a good meeting, and we got some good information out. And yesterday I spent the day in Sacramento lobbying with RCRC for Forest Health. And I think there's some good stuff that'll be coming out this evening, and hopefully it will be passed by Friday. That could put, you know, a continuous appropriation for the next 5 years towards forest health, which means fire breaks, clearing residences, and it could be, you know, knock on wood, it could be upwards of $1 billion.
Ooh,
so
that's impressive.
Yeah, not done yet. It's all conversation, but we're in the mix, and RCRC has really been leading the charge. So we're trying to stay out of the environmental issues and focus on the money, and then bring it back to our district. So hopefully, that's all I got, Mr. Chair.
Good report. Very good. Supervisor Oliveira.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I attended Wednesday the plan development meeting of Arnold. It's a local committee meeting looking at that issue. We're making great headway, and I'd like to commend all the citizens that are attending that meeting. It's an advisory committee that just sits back and takes a look at things, which will be preparing to be coming to the board with their findings in a formal manner. That's active and ongoing. I attended the Calaveras Mariposa Community Action meeting on the 23rd. That committee, I don't see her here, has been moving forward, and it's run by Kirsten. She's doing an excellent job. Supervisor Mills attended that meeting with me. So we're happy about that. And I also attended the continuing technical education meeting. This is a project that I've been working on for the last year with superintendents of both school districts, with Scott Nanick, also with Paul DeBarlo. There's programs that we're going to be having a meeting shortly with the CAO, introducing the possibility of the intern program in county government for juniors and seniors. This is a program that CAO Lutz has experienced in Tulare, and I'm glad to have his experience to kind of lead us in that direction. We'll have more information on that as we progress. We attended the acronyms are killing me. The CSCSA, which is the Calaveras Mariposa Child Support Association meeting in Bear Valley this time. Once again, this organization is doing remarkable work in child support recovery. They're doing the best in the state, probably in the top 5% for a little county association, JPA, like we have. And they continue to do well. Unfortunately, Supervisor Tofinelli got held up in a meeting.
I did.
You missed Bear Valley. It was beautiful.
Was it?
It was. No smoke. We had active fire base. Is right there now. They've moved the fire base for the Donnell fire. So it was a good, enjoyable ride up there.
All right. I have announcement from Patrick, who is our facilities manager, and he wanted me to poll the board. He is saying that on September 11th, the work out front here will be complete. So he would like to, at 8 a.m. on September 11th, that's a Tuesday board meeting, have a flag raising service at 8 a.m. Lasts about 15 minutes. And then he wants to know if we can, at the lunch on that day, go out and participate in the dedication of the trellis and work that they've done out there. And they've done an extensive amount of work. It looks wonderful. And he is telling me, and I had a conversation with him today, that he is putting it all on the line and saying that he will be done on September 11th for this dedication service. He is ambitious, but he tells me that he will. So I'd like to pull the board on whether you would like to do that on that Tuesday morning at a board meeting before 8 o'clock. And if we have a closed session, obviously closed session would have to start at about 8:15. And then at lunchtime, go out and participate in the dedication of his trellis work out there. So Supervisor Clapp.
It sounds exciting.
Supervisor Mills.
You're excited? Yes.
Supervisor Oliveira.
Yes.
Supervisor Garamendi.
I showed up at 7:30. He looked like he'd been working for a
He
couple
did.
hours already, so I believe him. So, yeah.
He's on it. He was here at 7 this morning. You're right. So, and I'm a yes, so we will do that, and the clerk can take that into account that during any closed session that we may have that time in county council, that we would start at 8:15 that day. Okay? And then we may dedicate a 2-hour lunch that day, so we can spend a half hour out there enjoying his work and his all of his guys out there that have been working so diligently to get this done. So, and that's all I have at this time. CAO Lutz, you have anything? County Council? Madam Clerk? No? And with that, we stand adjourned.
Don't we have public comment? We need 5.